Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to Changing Direction, your source for how to heal trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. We are here every Monday and Wednesday at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 24/7, 365 in the free archives and podcasts at changeyouchoose.com. I am Michelle Rosenthal, your host, also post-trauma coach and the founder of HealMyPTSD.com, the place where survivors, caregivers, and yes, even healing professionals go for information, cutting-edge research, and ideas for how to feel better and reclaim your life after trauma. And of course, why do I do all of this? Because I, like you, am a trauma survivor, and I lost over 25 years of my life to PTSD that was undiagnosed and then not properly treated. And by the time I came out of the darkness and into the light, I looked back and I thought, oh my gosh, all of this healing was possible, the reduction and then elimination of symptoms, the sleeping through the night, the stopping of the nightmares, the total calm and peace that I feel. You mean I could have had this if I had just had the right information all along? Holy cow, I could have healed maybe 2 decades ago. And with that thought was born the idea of what I could do to help you have the information you need so you can heal now rather than later. So I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of Changing Direction as we explore what is the pressing question that you have that needs to be answered. What are the thoughts that need to be explored? What are the beliefs that need to be acknowledged or even changed? And today we are going to really get down and dirty with the whole idea of death, because as survivors, we all have that moment where we experience a near-death moment, whether that's a psychological moment, an emotional moment, a spiritual moment, in my own case, a wholly physical moment where I actually left my body and then had to figure out, okay, I got to get back in there. So as we all go through our trauma experiences, we come up with the idea of death, and then we have to come up with a way to live with it. So I will be talking to an expert in this area today. Her name is Sandra Champlain, and she has written a fantastic book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And I love that because I'm very skeptical. I know you are too. We want proof, right? We want to be able to quantify and qualify so that we understand and we can really believe. And Sandra is going to give us all of that today. So before we jump into today's interview, I want to remind you also that coming up on May 6th, 5 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, we'll be doing the second of our free webinars in the series, How Trauma Affects Your Brain. Last month we did the science of your symptoms. And next month we will be doing how to reverse the way trauma affects your brain. Totally free, and at the end of the presentation, where I will be teaching you 5 free ways to start retraining your brain, I will also be doing a Q&A. And the last time we did this, holy cow, you guys were awesome. We had almost 200 questions that were submitted during the webinar, and I did my best to get through as many as possible. My team and I are working on how we're going to answer the rest, because it is my personal mission to help you, and that means every question matters. You can sign up to join us and ask your question at changeyouchoose.com/webinar. You can also just hit up the changeyouchoose.com website and click on the link for the webinar. So that's what's coming up on May 6th. And on our next show, next Monday, we'll be talking about 7 actions you can take to start your healing process. What are they? How do you start to organize? I've got some ideas. I'm going to share them with you next Monday. But until then, here we go. Let's dive into the real meat of today's entire topic. So let me introduce you to my guest. Sandra Champlain is a top graduate of the Culinary Institute of America. So she not only knows about life and death, she knows about food. She owns the Kent Coffee and Chocolate Company in Connecticut and travels with world-class race car teams providing hospitality in the American Le Mans and Grand Am series. But here's the catch. Her fear of dying and her skepticism led her on a 15-year journey to discover the undeniable proof of life after death and the reason we experience grief. After the death of her dad, she created How to Survive Grief, which is a free audio that was quickly heard by thousands of people worldwide. And then she took this powerful information that reduced the pain and saved lives, and she realized there's a book here. So in January 2013, just a little over a year ago, We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death was published, and it has become a #1 bestseller in the United States and Canada, and it's also rated on the top of grief and motivational books on Amazon. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce my illustrious guest, Sandra Champlain. Welcome to Changing Direction.
Oh, Michelle, thank you. And I love the word illustrious. I've never been called that before. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Am I pronouncing your last name properly?
You are Champlain.
Okay. It's Champlain, right? It's French. Okay. Just checking. All right. So, Sandra, I read your book, and I've been waiting to talk to you because I loved the book, and I thought you covered so many really interesting things. And I want to start our conversation just by reading a little bit from the introduction so that everyone gets a sense of who you are and what your purpose was, because then we're going to dive into some stuff that's definitely off the beaten track. So This is what you wrote in the introduction of the book. You wrote, I will begin to share my journey with you and give you all the proof that I have uncovered that we don't die. You will read stories about some of the greatest minds in history and why they believed in life after death. You will learn about the many men and women who are currently communicating with the deceased by using audio and visual tools, as well as those using mental abilities. You will discover how blind people can accurately see using the power of their minds. You will learn about a man who wrote a fictional novel about the Titan, a ship that hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage, 14 years before the Titanic sank. You will learn some amazing things about the world and its inhabitants that may leave you in disbelief, but they are so very real. The best part about all of this is that you don't have to believe me. You will, however, believe yourself when you have experiences that you cannot explain logically. I loved that in the introduction because it had me rooting from the edge of my seat like, yeah, go Sandra, show me the way. So let's get into, before we get into the real meat of the book, I would really like to start with, you had a very personal connection, obviously, to this work. What made you decide to explore this topic of we don't die?
It's so interesting because me even hearing your story at the beginning, I mean, you probably never thought you'd be on the path you're on right now. And for me being a chef, I never thought I'd be an author having a book about life after death, because I was somebody who never believed in this kind of thing. If you had ever told me I would have studied with psychics and mediums and things like that, never. And so it's funny that, we're the ones now, but it really does help people have better lives. So kudos to you for doing what you're doing. But my journey just started from a very secret fear of dying. I never verbalized it to anybody, but I was like out of control, panic-stricken, afraid of what's going to happen after I die. Now, I wasn't diagnosed with an illness and I didn't just lose somebody, but I was going through a time in my life that a lot of bad stuff was happening. I mean, not crazy bad, but some failure in my business, failure in relationships, not happy with myself. And, those moments we look up at the stars and it's like, who am I? What is my life for? And I really thought that, I couldn't handle not knowing if in my final breath, does Sandra go on? Or is this it? Is this crummy life it? And so it showed up as a heavy-duty fear. And I wish I could tell you it was soothed just by religious faith. I grew up Catholic, and we believe in heaven and our loved ones are still around, but that wasn't enough. So I started on this secret expedition, but it all came from fear.
And fear is such a big motivator for obviously everything we do. Let me ask you this, and since you brought up the idea of fear, Sandra, were you at all afraid of the expedition and the exploration that you embarked on? I mean, were you afraid of what the answer would be one way or the other?
I was afraid I wouldn't get an answer. That's what the fear was, because I grew up in a family that my dad was an airline pilot, and he was very matter of fact. If we can't see it, it can't be real, right? And as kids, I'm 48 years old now, but as a kid, there were very few times that we even heard about psychics or mediums, and if we did, those people are crackpots. None of that's real. It's all a scam. So I thought the best I was going to come up with is I just have to have faith that there's something else, that I'm never going to get any proof. And so at one point, the first part of my journey was studying major world religions, and lots of common stories of the hereafter that everybody believes in it, but why? What's the proof? And then I said, you know what, if I can just be a good person, maybe nothing bad will happen to me, And so at that point, I was afraid I wasn't going to find anything. I really was.
I think that makes total sense. How did you deal with the fear of what happened to you after we die, the fear of not having an answer? How have you, over the course of your life, and since I read the book, I know you've been through so many different things, how did you maintain your relationship to fear in a way that allowed you to cope with and manage, and more importantly, above all, I think, still carry on?
Yeah, I think at that time I didn't know the answer, and so I just thought if I could dig far enough, somebody's got to have it. So kind of naive in it, but what it had me do, probably you have similar with what you're up to right now, is it just had me digging everywhere I could, and it wasn't even just in life after death studies. It was in what is it to be a human? Because here's the thing, Michelle, if we don't die, it leaves us with a big question of like, well, then what the heck is our life for? What's the point? And I really think that, we're here on earth to learn, to love, to grow, to have the ups and the downs and the suffering and the great things that happen that all will mold us into a better person, better soul, whatever you want to call it. We learn forgiveness and whatnot. So part of my journey was, what the heck is this about being human? So in some of the research I did and courses that I took, there, talking about fear, it came up so much. And, there's the real biological reasons of things to be afraid of. We don't want to jump into moving traffic or jump off a bridge, and there's a real fear of loud noises that people have, but a lot of the fear that we have is man-made, and either we adopted from our parents what they were afraid of, or we created our own fears. But fear, for the most part, if it's not a life or death thing, is an illusion. We come up with these huge physiological symptoms of like what it feels like to be afraid, and truthfully, nothing's worse. And in the moment that we are afraid, we shut down. But I've learned, and now I wish I could tell you I'm the expert on this, but I'm not. But there are times that I've realized that, I've been through some really horrible, horrible, horrible things. And is the fear of whatever it is I'm afraid of, is it worse than something else I've been through? And now that I've lost my dad, which was the most painful thing that's happened to me, geez, I can get through anything. So sometimes realizing that I can get through anything has me step into fear. And the funny thing is when we're actually engaged in the present moment of the thing that we were afraid to do, we're so present that the fear isn't there. And, so much fear is just an illusion. And we only can have new results in our life if we get through doing something new, which oftentimes there's fear. So I'm not the expert, but I do have the toolbox. I don't always choose to use them. That makes sense.
That's exactly what I was looking for, and I totally agree with you. I'm a published poet, and I have this whole poem that's all about, there's this one line in it that I think you'll resonate with: all pain is relative, this I can endure. And the whole poem is about the worst pain I've ever been in has taught me that every other pain is manageable. Like, no matter how bad it is, I can do it. So I think you're right. Fear really can teach us that.
It sure can. And so, it's interesting because I've gone through some really great things in my life and some really awful things, and I don't think there's a person listening right now that hasn't suffered tremendously. and also had some joy. But when we look back on our life, Michelle, often we have all these regrets and what we should have done and shouldn't have done. But it's like trusting whatever decision you made at the time was the best thing, the younger you could do in that moment. And all those things had to happen for you to be who you are today. So I really think, being on planet Earth and, the souls that I say we are, like it all has to happen for our growth to occur. And a lot of it is not pleasant. I know.
My guest today is Sandra Champlain. She is the best-selling author of We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. So, all right, Sandra, lay it on me. Let's talk about the proof that you discovered that we don't die. So tell me what the discovery was and what the proof is that supports it. Go.
Yes, love to. I know. First of all, I know that our interview is short, and so I want to encourage your listeners to go to wedon'tdie.com. And the introduction that you spoke about and the foreword and the first chapter of my book, you can read there for free. And also I have an audio about grief, which is tremendously healing, and that's a free download there. So wedon'tdie.com, because there's no way I can get to everything I want to say in the time we have. Okay. But to start off with, I took a course with a world-famous medium named Doreen Virtue out in California, top secret. I flew to Laguna Beach to take a course, and the promise was you would be someone who can accurately tell the deceased people around others after being there. And the skeptic inside me said, there's no way that's possible, and if it is possible, it's certainly not going to happen to Sandra Champlain because, I'm not gifted by any means. But my fear of dying, Michelle, is what took me out there, just in that slight chance that it was possible. And the abbreviated story is when I got into the course, the instructor, Doreen Virtue, she said, I want to give an explanation how we do medium readings, and we're going to do like a mock trial run before we actually get into it. So she had everybody grab a partner, pretend to be mediums, and she talked us through it. She says, one person go first, close your eyes, hold the hands of your partner, have like an invisible connection between your hearts, like just imagine a beam of energy. It's a safe space. And she says, you talk to the deceased like you would talk to any other human being, and just like mental telepathy, just say, who are you, who wants to come talk, and would you like to speak to me? And you still have manners, and, we don't lose our personality when we cross over. So she just had us play make-believe and tell our partner who we saw standing behind them, completely make it up, though, because, again, she took the pressure off. We weren't really doing it. So I'm creative. I'm a chef. You talked about that in the beginning. I can do it. I went first, and I told my partner, and this with my eyes closed, that her grandfather's name was Jan. He was a fisherman in Denmark. He died of lung cancer. I saw in my imagination a man with blonde hair and blue eyes and big gap between his front teeth standing there, and that he never told his daughter, which is her mom, that he loved her. He was one of these real tough, rough, tough dads that just never spoke the words. And so could she give her daughter the message that Dad loves her? So, that's what my imagination made up. So I opened my eyes and said to my partner, okay, your turn, you go. And Michelle, she just had tears running down her cheeks. She looked at me, and it wasn't make-believe anymore. She says, my grandfather's name was Jan. He worked on a fishing boat in Denmark. He did have the gap between his teeth and blonde hair and blue eyes. He did die of lung cancer, and he never told my mom that he loved her.
Wow.
Yeah. Still gives me goosebumps.
Amazing. I can imagine it would.
And gave a similar account of my grandfather, who she saw standing next to me, complete with his name. He walked with a cane. He had a big German Shepherd dog by his side, and, things like that. So that was the first thing that cracked the door open. But it wasn't enough because, unfortunately, when, I'm not proficient in mediumship, and I compare mediumship to like somebody learning to play the piano. I mean, certainly we can spend lots of years and perfect it. But for the rest of us, certainly we can learn to play a song or two. Well, I was not right most of the time. I mean, most of the time I was wrong. And seeing deceased looks just like our imaginations. So often, many of us see our loved ones in our dreams, or, if we're zoning out, driving down the highway, we feel the presence of someone. I say they're really there. So I wanted to get more proof because this was. See, now it rested my fears because we started really playing with this. There was some information that I got about deceased relatives that I didn't even know was true till I came home and I started asking people in my life, and those people really did exist. So it's not like somebody was just reading my mind, which I thought was very cool. But I got this instinct that if I could get more proof, then perhaps someday I could help other people. And because not just do we all lose loved ones, but, the fear of dying is mankind's numero uno fear. So I knew someday I'd want to make a difference there. So other things that I've done, you talked about PTSD. Dr. Alan Botkin, who was he worked with the Veterans Hospital here in the States, he does something, and I don't know if you speak about this, about EMDR.
I've interviewed Francine Shapiro on this show, the founder of EMDR.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Alan Botkin was not a person that believed in life after death, never even gave it much thought. But when he did the EMDR with his patients, he gave them a little extra on the left-right eye movement. It would almost propel these people into a place in their mind where they would see life beyond. Right. So many of the veterans saw, say, a young woman that had died, that he had witnessed, could actually see her all grown up in the hereafter. They were giving Dr. Botkin accurate accounts of his own deceased loved ones that they could see. Now, for a man who didn't believe in this, suddenly people are telling him about his deceased loved ones, and he started doing more research. All to say, Dr. Alan Botkin now has formed the IADC, which is called Induced After-Death Communication. He's got practitioners all over the world, and they all have to be trained in EMDR to do this. But it's not just to have people believe in life after death, but it's an extremely healing technique to help people through trauma and through grief. So that was cool to meet with him and hear his stories. There's a woman named Rita Berkowitz who is not only a medium, but she's an artist. So for the last 30 years, she will see a client and she will see their loved one around them and draw a sketch of that person, or actually a portrait with colors. And her website, it's fun to look at it, thespiritartist.com. Because what you find is Rita can see those people in her mind's eye, and she's got on her website the photographs of people as they existed right next to her portrait of what she just saw in her mind. And so often the person looks identical or very similar. I saw her after my dad died, and my dad had been hooked up to tubes, 74 years old, gray, scrawny, like death knocking on his door when he died. What she drew was this young man with dark hair and big smile and almost identical to what my dad looked like when he was in the Air Force. And she said, when we cross over, we become our best age. We get to pick. And there's no bad vision. There's good health. I thought, oh, that was it. Plus, she gave really specific things about my dad as if he was whispering right into her ear.
That's amazing. My guest today is Sandra Champlain. We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. Sandra, I know I just sort of jumped in here because there's so many great stories, and so many of them are in We Don't Die. So as I see that our time is dwindling, I wanted to give you an opportunity to just, in like 60 seconds, sum up your idea about how we handle grief, because that's a hot topic, and so maybe you and I can work out that you'll come back and we'll just focus there. But in 60 seconds, what's your idea about the best way to handle grief? And then we'll wrap up. I want to remind everyone that you can find more information about Sandra and her book, We Don't Die, at wedon'tdie.com. But Sandra, leave us with an idea about grief.
Yeah, grief is what had me write the book, Michelle, honest to God, because when I created that audio and people literally started writing to me, not only did it heal their pain, but people chose not to commit suicide because of my words. I felt like I had a moral responsibility. Grief is not just, as you know, when we lose a loved one, when our health changes, when we have a significant loss of any kind. Our brain actually has to kind of reformat itself for the new reality. And so we lose some healthy chemicals in our brain while we're going through, I call it like a withdrawal process. Imagine somebody who's lost or giving up drugs or alcohol has to go through withdrawal. You can't say, well, I'm just going to get over it in 3 days. No, the body's got to go through it in its own time. And so to understand first and foremost that it's not your fault that you're grieving. It's a physical thing that we have to go through, but there are some things that we can do to heal a little bit faster. Understanding grief is the most important thing. So when you go to WeDon'tDie.com, please take 70 minutes and listen to the How to Survive Grief. But anything that we can do to put our mind back and start raising some of these healthy chemicals, things like going outside, getting some sunlight, doing something that you love, being around people, listening to either happy music or seeing a funny movie might not be something you would normally pick, and you might think, I don't want to do that. I'm too sad. But if you can get your mind off the grief for just a few, even seconds, and onto something else, something pleasurable, you can restore some of the brain chemicals, and you won't have all the serious side effects of the grief, all the pain, all the crying. Yes, you're going to go through a huge amount of it, and that's part of the journey. Really, they say what you resist persists. If you need to cry, cry. If you feel guilty, but understand that's just a part of grief. Do not stew on it. If you're angry, don't beat up on your neighbor. Feel it for a moment. Oh, this is just the angry stage. Let it go.
I understand completely.
Yeah.
Sandra, thank you so much. I asked you a hard question. You did a great job, and I want to thank you so much for being here and for speaking your truth, which I know couldn't have been easy in the beginning, but you are very fluent in it now. And I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you for sharing yourself and your ideas. The book is We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death, and the website is WeDon'tDie.com. Sandra, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Thanks, Michelle. My pleasure.
Have a great rest of the afternoon. And for you,